Good afternoon and welcome to the third event of our Summer Skill Up Alumni Career Webinar Series. My name is Desiree Rodriguez and I serve as the Assistant Vice President for Lifelong Engagement and Alumni Relations at the University of Miami. It is my pleasure to welcome you to today's session, Career Positivity During Challenging Times. The Topple Career Center and Development and Alumni Relations are proud to team up to offer this series to provide University of Miami alumni some inspiration, motivation, and tangible advice from alumni experts in various fields of work. We appreciate you taking the time to join us today and hope that you find today's conversation engaging and helpful in a very meaningful way. If you have not had an opportunity to attend our previous sessions, they are recorded and can be found online. And additionally, we have one more session in the series, which is scheduled for Wednesday, August 5th at 5 p.m. Eastern Time to discuss lessons learned from the Great Recession. We're going to go ahead and put the links to these in the chat, so feel free to check those out. This will be a unique conversation incorporating alumni who will share stories of navigating the job search, taking risks, and staying motivated during challenging times. So we hope to see you there. Now, before I introduce our featured speakers for this afternoon, I'd like to share a few logistics with you to ensure you get the most of the conversation. The chat feature is available for you to comment and to interact with our speakers, so please feel free to use it. We also ask that you submit any questions for a Q&A session we will do a little later through the Q&A feature located at the bottom of the screen. Both will be available throughout the presentation, so you're welcome to use either. You all should have received a confirmation email that included some attachments, which will also be used as part of today's conversation. We're putting those in the chat so that you have them handy. So before we get started, we want to take a moment and take a poll of our audience this afternoon. So if you can take a moment and please respond to the question on your screen, how long has it been since you graduated? This will give our speakers a sense of who is on the webinar, so we truly appreciate your participation in submitting those responses. We'll go ahead and give a few more minutes for everyone to respond. Looks like we have a nice mix of folks on this call. If you haven't made your selection, please do so. All right, so it looks like 44% are 0 to 5 years out, 19% 5 to 10, and 38% of you are more than 10 years. Thank you so much for being here. It is now my pleasure to introduce our two featured speakers for today's conversation. We are thrilled to have two experts in their fields, Thymi Fina and Shani Magowski. Thymi is a licensed mental health counselor in the state of Florida. She is a graduate from the School of Education with a master's degree in mental health counseling from the University of Miami. She is experienced in providing individual, family, couples, and group therapies in both English and Spanish. As a Cuban native, Thymi is also particularly attuned to the unique needs of multicultural clients and families. Currently, she works as a therapist at Gatewell Therapy Center, a private practice in the Coral Gables area. She also works as a group therapist at Oliver Pyatt Centers, a renowned eating disorder treatment center in South Miami. She specializes in treating complex eating disorders and co-occurring conditions in adults, and is certified in providing evidence-based treatment for post-traumatic stress disorder. Thymi also served as a graduate assistant at the Topple Career Center at in her spare time, obviously, where she gained valuable experience in career skills training and career counseling. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Our second speaker is Shani Magowski, a graduate from the University of Miami in Communication and Sociology. Yay, pom-poms. She is a leadership and organizational cultural consultant, sought-after speaker, author of The Better Boss Blueprint, host of the Leadership Show podcast, and founder of the Leadership Project. Shani spent the early part of her career at Goldman Sachs analyzing, executing, and marketing deals for a wide array of companies globally. Later transitioning to executive management roles, she served as GM of a TV station in Vail, Colorado, and COO, CFO of an all-virtual marketing firm. The Leadership Project was born from her passion to help people and organizations get their shift together. Love it, Shani. Shani is also a professional certified coach by the International Coach Federation and is certified in a series of other powerful leadership tools. As you can see, we have brought two incredible powerhouses to you today, and it is my absolute pleasure to turn it over to Thymi and Shani.
Thank you so much, Desiree.
Yes, thank you for having us. So I just wanted to say that Shani and I are very excited to be here with all of you. Even though we can't see you, we feel your presence. And we're excited to share our different perspectives in aiding you as you navigate a time that is really unprecedented and very uncertain and chaotic. So from my end as a licensed mental health counselor, I will be bringing the mental health perspective regarding how you can stay grounded and balanced mentally as you cope with this period that is so difficult. And Shani, if you want to share a little bit about your perspective.
Absolutely. As a leadership coach, I help people get out of their own way. And as someone who herself has shifted careers no fewer than 4 times, if that's what you're up to for whatever reason, I feel ya. And I have personal experience with some of the tools that we'll be teaching today, as well as a variety of other ones. And I'm here to tell you that if you do the hard work and keep this under control, it'll be the best thing you've ever done.
Mm-hmm. And so today we're going to really provide you with some concrete strategies for managing your thinking around that and also how to stay grounded. And before we get started with the strategies that we want to introduce to you today, we did want to take another quick poll to gauge everyone's current employment situation. That way we can really kind of tailor the information we provide you today to that. Desiree, if you can get that set up for us, wonderful. So you see 3 different options there. I believe you can select more than one. So we'll give you guys a few minutes to make your selections.
While everyone is checking their relevant boxes, I will say thank you to whomever worded the first poll about with the maximum being 10 plus years since graduation. That's a very nice thing to do to people for whom it's been multiple decades, not just one.
Right. Okay, so it looks like over half of you are currently employed. About 34% of you have had your employment impacted by COVID-19, and 44% of you are currently looking for a job. Well, thank you all for participating in that. It gives us a better sense of who we're speaking to and allows us to really tailor the information to you. So I'm going to get us started today. So we're ready to pull up the slides whenever you guys are ready to go for us. Wonderful. And we're going to get started. Perfect. That's exactly the slide that we're looking for. So I'm going to share a little bit more about this before we jump into that. One of the biggest questions that I get as a therapist is, what can I do to cope? What can I do to cope with a situation that might be very stressful, overwhelming, anxiety-provoking, uncertain, you name it? All qualifiers that I think are very apt to describe the situation we're currently in. And obviously there's many ways to respond to that question. It's a loaded one, but one of the biggest things that I would recommend is to first, and Shani hinted at this as well at the beginning, first notice how you're speaking to yourself about what's happening. So our thoughts influence our emotions, our bodies, our behavior. And there's a myth in our society that when we're critical of ourselves, when we treat ourselves in a very harsh and critical manner, that somehow that will motivate us or get us activated, that will promote our success. You know, this idea that if I'm a drill sergeant with myself, I'm going to accomplish way more. But actually, the research has shown us that people tend to achieve way more when they're actually compassionate with themselves, when they speak to themselves in kinder ways. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about all the different types of problematic thinking patterns that you might notice yourself engaging in. And I just want to say, I think we all struggle with some of this. And so I'll help you figure out what that might sound like, and also help you figure out how to reframe some of those things that you're saying to yourselves. And to kind of really bring home that idea of self-criticism versus self-compassion, I always like to give the example of, let's say you have a child and your child comes home to you with a bad grade on an assignment. You have a couple of different ways you could respond to that. The self-critical way would be, you know, very harsh. You're such an idiot. How could you score that low? What were you thinking? Etc. And I know that sounds very harsh when we think about saying it to a child, but how often do we say these things to ourselves and not even blink an eye? And I think actually thinking about it in terms of a child helps to really put it in perspective for us. Versus if, as a parent, you reply to that child in a way that's more compassionate, such as, oh, that sucks. I know you worked really hard to study for that. What do you think we can do to improve your score? What do you need? How can I help you? So if you notice, the child is likely to respond to those responses very differently. The criticism is more likely to lead to feeling paralyzed, incompetent, unable to move forward, versus the more compassionate way is more encouraging, more supportive. It helps the person leave feeling like, I can do better, I can work on this, I have some agency here. And so we want to be mindful of how you're speaking to yourself, just as you would be mindful of how you speak to a child or how you speak to someone that you're close to. So jumping to the actual slide that we have in front of us, it's going to be divided into two different slides. This is from David Burns. I did not create this, but the examples that I'll provide you today are my own. And so these are, I believe there's 10 different thinking patterns that are problematic, that tend to negatively impact our functioning and our mental health. And this comes from cognitive behavioral therapy, information that Shani will go over a little bit more in depth later on as well. So we're going to go through each type. I'm going to provide you an example of what it could sound like, and then I'm going to give you an example of a reframe. Now, reframe is essentially just like a reworking of the thought, a different way to talk to yourself about that. So, and the goal in reviewing this and in reviewing the different examples and the reframes is that you'll get better at noticing your thoughts, at calling them out as biased, and already those two steps help to create a little bit of distance from my thoughts. I'm not assuming that it's a fact. I'm noticing, oh, my thoughts are going in this way, they're fitting this pattern. Maybe there's something off there with how I'm thinking. Already that separates me from my thoughts and gives me a little bit more perspective. So not only are we doing that, but then we're also going to learn how to correct them to something a little bit more balanced, more realistic. So I'm going to give you some examples for each one. So we'll start with the first one, all or nothing thinking. You see the description there. You look at things in absolute black and white categories. So in regards to career, an example of what that could sound like might be, if I don't have a job, then I'm a failure. So very black and white, not a lot of gray there. A possible reframe might sound like, whether or not I have a job can be affected by many factors outside of my control. Given that, it's probably not an accurate measure of success. And if you want to go a little bit further than that, you might say to yourself, when I think of others, I tend to measure their success in how they treat others, their ability to generate new ideas, their ability to give back, their leadership, etc. So that's a little bit lengthy. Typically, you want it to be a bit more concise, but sometimes the things we say to ourselves are loaded and it takes a little bit to unpack them. With the reframes, when you're trying to come up with what else, how could I change the way that I'm talking to myself? What would be another way to say this to myself? You want to try to poke holes in your thought in whatever way you can think of. So is there any way that I can prove that this is not quite true or not quite accurate? And the reframe doesn't have to be positive, and it doesn't have to be the opposite of what you say to yourself. So for instance, if I'm thinking I'm a horrible person, it's not very effective to then just say, oh, I'm a great person. Because if I'm thinking I'm a horrible person, I'm not going to buy that I'm a great person. So instead, you want to really try to create a reframe that you actually buy into, something that's realistic, that you can actually believe. Some questions to consider asking yourself as you're generating a reframe, and I'm going to give you lots of examples of reframes, but just to get you thinking, you might ask yourself, is there any evidence at all in my life that shows this thought is not completely true? What would I tell a friend or a child, again, this child idea, who was having this exact thought about themselves? And then the last one that I like to, even if this is true, is it helpful to say this to myself? So it might be accurate and it still might not serve me to go down that rabbit hole of thought. So just some things to consider as you're generating these reframes. Let's go to number 2, overgeneralization. You view a negative event as a never-ending pattern of defeat. It's going to keep happening exactly this way. An example could be, bad things always happen to me. A possible reframe might sound like, although I've experienced some really tough challenges lately, I need to remember that I have also experienced really great moments in my life. So if you notice, we're not discounting that bad things have been happening, but we're adding perspective, we're creating more balance. That's not the only thing that has happened to me. Number 3, mental filter. You dwell on the negatives and ignore the positives. An example might be, because that job didn't go as planned, it was a total waste of time. So not looking at any positive thing that came out of that, only kind of having tunnel vision on the bad. And so a possible reframe to that one might sound like, although I wish the outcome had been different with that job, I learned many things about myself personally and professionally through that opportunity. So again, we're not saying, what a great job, I'm so thrilled I had that job. You're saying, I don't like how that ended, and here's what I got out of it. So it's, again, adding perspective, adding balance. Discounting the positives. This one's a little similar to mental filter. You insist that your accomplishments or positive qualities don't count. So an example of that one might be, I'm sure my colleague only gave me that positive feedback because they were trying to be nice. How often do we kind of say that to ourselves just to kind of disregard something kind that someone says to us? A possible reframe might sound like, this colleague has always been very transparent with me. It's possible they meant what they said. So if you notice, I'm not saying that's absolutely true what they said. I may not buy that, but I can say it's possible they meant it, just like it's possible they didn't, but it's possible they did. And so you're creating some doubt in the things you're saying to yourselves, which is really the goal here. You want to try to poke some holes there. Jumping to conclusions, and this one breaks it up into 2, so I'm going to take it one by one. The first one, mind reading. You assume that people are reacting negatively to you when there's no definite evidence for this. An example, people seem distracted as I'm talking, they must think I'm an idiot. This is a common one that I hear about public speaking. A possible reframe might be, we're meeting late on a weekday evening, it's possible their reaction has nothing to do with me. So I'm kind of zooming out and exploring, could there be any other explanation for this besides it must be about me? Fortune telling, you arbitrarily predict things will turn out badly. An example of that one might be, my boss asked me to join her in a meeting, she's probably going to fire me. How many of you have had that kind of drop in your gut feeling when your boss schedules a meeting with you? And so a possible reframe might be, the last 10 times my boss asked me into a meeting, I had the same thought and it was never accurate. So then you also want to reflect on data. Has this happened to me before? Did what I think was going to happen actually occur? And kind of use that to poke holes in these thoughts. Next slide, please. Perfect. So then we have magnification or minimization. Again, I'm going to take it one by one. Magnification, you blow things way out of proportion. An example of that could be, this is the worst thing that has ever happened to me. I think it's a common thought spiral we go down sometimes when things don't go our way. A possible reframe might be, I've been through a lot in my life and I've always been able to make it through. So it's not saying that, bad things haven't occurred, they have, and I've gone through it. Minimization, you shrink the importance of things inappropriately. I tend to see this more in terms of our thinking about ourselves, that we minimize our qualities, our talents, etc. An example might be, I'm really good at X, but so are lots of people, it's not that significant or worth mentioning. A possible reframe for that one could be, although others may also have this skill, I want to be confident in what I bring to the table and market myself accordingly. So really valuing what you are bringing to the table and challenging this idea that it's minimal or irrelevant. Emotional reasoning, you reason from how you feel. Example, I feel like an idiot, so I really must be one. I don't feel like doing this, so I'll put it off. This one is really getting at the idea that you start to view your feelings as facts. Because I feel this way, it must be accurate. An example based on career could be, I feel worthless, so I really must be. And a possible reframe could be, although I feel worthless, you're acknowledging the feeling, although I feel worthless, objectively, I know that my friends, family, colleagues would say that I add value to their lives, even if I struggle to believe this sometimes. So if you notice, it's not a total shift, but we're adding a little bit more context and data there to poke holes in what you're saying to yourself. Should statements. You criticize yourself or other people with shoulds or shouldn'ts, must, oughts, have tos, or similar offenders. An example, I should have found a job by now. I should have landed a promotion by now, etc. A possible reframe, I wish I had found a job by now. And I always love the idea of switching I should. You want to get really good at catching those shoulds in your head. Switching I should into I wish or I would like really kind of softens it. I wish I had found a job by now. I will continue to work hard and put myself out there in an effort to make this happen for myself. Would be a great way to switch up that should. Labeling,
Can I
you
just pop in for 1 second, Timmy?
Yeah, please.
Regarding job search, the other big example of people shoulding on themselves is, I should be spending more time looking for a job. I should be doing this. I should be doing that. And a lot of times, just doing things actually isn't what moves the needle. It's shifting our mindset, which is why so much of what you're saying right now in terms of recognizing these cognitive distortions is so important, because once you fix your mindset, then when you do the things that you do to look for a new job, they're going to yield more fruit.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I appreciate you chiming in. I think that's such a good point. Labeling, you identify with your shortcomings. Instead of saying I made a mistake, you tell yourself I'm a jerk or a fool or a loser. So an example of that one might be that interview went terribly, I'm such a loser. And again, this sounds harsh, but I think our thoughts can really be harsh when they're directed at us. Things we would never say to other people, we can say to ourselves at times. And an example of a reframe for that might be, I wish, here's that I wish again, I wish that interview had gone better. I'm going to do X, Y, and Z so that I can be better prepared for my next one. Lots of people have a hard time with interviews, but with practice, I can improve. And then the last one splits it up into two again, personalization. You blame yourself for something you weren't entirely responsible for. So here's where I assume it must be about me. An example, I was laid off because I wasn't good enough. Reframe might sound like, I know lots of incredible people who have been laid off before. That decision was probably shaped by factors far beyond just my skills and competence. Just to give you an example there, that I think many people can relate to right now, unfortunately. And blame, you blame other people and overlook ways that your own attitudes and behavior might contribute to a problem. So this one's on the other side of the spectrum. Personalization, it must be about me. Blame is, it couldn't possibly be me. Neither of those is great. We want to find that gray area of like, what parts are not in my control, what parts are, and Shani's going to talk more about that. And so for blame, it might sound like, I'm not getting any callbacks from my interviews. All of these companies must really have it out for me. And so a possible reframe might sound like, these companies probably have bigger things going on than keeping a specific vendetta against me. Maybe I can practice my interviewing skills with others and see if there's anything I could improve on. So that's just to give you a quick snapshot of what these thoughts could sound like and what are some ways you could work through them. So I'm going to hand it over to Shani, and we're going to go on to our next slide.
Terrific, thank you. So a lot of what you just heard, you may be thinking, yeah, why do I do that to myself? Why do I speak to myself in a way I would never speak to anyone else? And if I had a friend or a family member who spoke to me the way I speak to myself, I would tell them to pound sand so fast, right? Yet we tolerate these talk tracks in our own head. Well, here's the thing, it's not our fault. It's because we're human and we are wired with a negativity bias to begin with, okay? And we're always fighting that. It's a constant battle to switch and reframe. And in addition to the neuroscience of human beings being wired to a negativity bias, which, by the way, is just because in the scheme of universal time, you know, where we are right now is such a minor sliver that we haven't adapted away from our gut instincts to fight, flight, or freeze in response to fear. In current times, instead of it being, you know, a saber-toothed tiger, it's you know, our ego that's threatened or our position, right? And so we're still wired for that. So just know that it's natural and you're not alone. And if anybody tells you that they don't fight the negativity bias, they're lying, okay? Number two, we're also socialized to think these things about ourselves. And so what you're seeing on the slide right now, the arrows that are going into us, those are all the thoughts and beliefs and assumptions and stories that other people tell us. Well, you should be a better student and you should have gotten promoted by now, and here's what good looks like, and if you don't, then you're a failure. And right, so we're taking in all of these social, you know, let's just call them unsolicited opinions and we're internalizing them, and then they funnel up to our thoughts where we start having those toxic thoughts. Okay, the opposite of that and is having a self-authored mind, meaning you write your own story. Okay, and that's part of what we're doing when we're reframing, is saying, you know what, like, I don't have to listen to the conventional wisdom or, you know, the BS that a different generation is feeding me about how I should manage my career. I'm my own person. I'm going to write my own story because I can. Okay, so just to give you that perspective, you know, because I think some people are visual learners, which is why I love this slide, because you think about, you know, all of these factors that are coming at you and we're soaking them up. Well, you know, pretend you're Wonder Woman or Wonder Man, and you're like those arrows, you're like fending them off and saying, no, I'm not going to absorb you. And instead, I'm going to think for myself and project that out into the world, that self-authored mind. Okay, next slide. Taimia referenced cognitive behavioral therapy, otherwise known as CBT, and it doesn't really matter. This framework, I think, is very much common sense, and I love it. Okay, so, and you can see the arrows kind of go in every direction between thoughts and emotions and behaviors, because it can, you know, you as humans, right, we can be triggered in any which way and coming from any directions. But let's start at the top of this triangle with our thoughts. When we have a negative thought, that impacts how we feel. On the, you know, going the opposite way, we can actually recognize that we feel a certain emotion first, and then that triggers thoughts. And regardless of which came first, the chicken or the egg in that scenario, it impacts our behavior. So if you can just build the slide, we're going to give a quick example here. Think of, yes, okay. So if we think, oh, crap, I've been furloughed, or I've been laid off, or, you know, I've been given double the responsibility because my colleagues have been laid off and I was already working too many hours and now I just can't stand it. I hate my job. You know, it's like, oh, okay. So we have that thought. How do you think we're going to feel? Click. We're going to feel fear and anxiety and any number of other emotions that will trigger this kind of behavior, perhaps. And click on the slide. And because we're feeling that way, we might snap at someone, a colleague, a client, a vendor, a family member, a friend. And that's not really who we are, but, you know, we've got a, you know, this mindset of adversity, and we're going to horribilize it and sensationalize it and catastrophize it, And we can't help but project that and show up that way with other people. So if we call this, sort of like the fear triangle, we can shift that to a more creative triangle. So if we can go to the next slide, and here's what that would look like. Again, same inputs, thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. And so if we click on the first word, so if we just reframe and be like, you know what, I'm going to be okay. Pick a reframe that we heard earlier with Jaime, like, you know what, yes, something negative happened to me right now, and negative things have happened to me in the past. I'm going to be okay. Or, I'm overwhelmed at work right now because I'm doing 2.5 jobs. I'm going to work my way through this. I'm going to learn to prioritize better, or delegate better, or manage expectations differently. Whatever it is, I will be okay. So we become calmer. That sense of anxiety gets toned down, and then boom, our behavior changes because our come from is changing. And instead of snapping at someone, we might click inspire someone, right? Because probably somebody else is feeling the way you did in the red triangle, but because we've moved into the green triangle, the creative triangle, we can help someone overcome and reframe their own thoughts and be an inspiration. And this, plug in any situation in any aspect of life into these 3 points of the triangle. It doesn't have to be a career change or a job difficulty, right? Because during COVID-19, those are only among some of our challenges, right? We could plug in our kids studying from home and not being able to go to summer camp or do play dates or whatever it is. If we let our thoughts overtake our emotions, or our emotions continue to conjure up negative thoughts, we're never going to have the behavior that's representative of our best self, if you will. Okay, next slide. Okay. So essentially distilling this down into simply what's happening and looking them on the same page. So we're either reacting to problems or we're creating outcomes. And it's like, it's a fine line. And it has to do with viewing the situation, the what is, as a problem or a threat, or more creatively, an opportunity. And believe it or not, when we feel fearful of something or excited about something, it's actually the same chemicals that are being released from our brains. So again, reframe it to, man, I'm really scared out of my wits, to, oh, wow, opportunity almost always means something cool happens. And from that place, you can say, okay, so what do I want? What's my vision for my career? Or what's my purpose? And am I actually in a job that is fulfilling of why I think I'm here on this earth? Or did I just kind of get stuck in a job after I graduated because I majored in it, or because it was the only job offer I got and I never really thought to get off the track, right? So it could be an opportunity to say, what is my vision? And then, and so from a place of passion to say, God, you know what? I really don't want to be an accountant or whatever. You can say, I want to be a writer, or, whatever your passion is, and then you're going to take a different action. And by the way, you guys, if there's any questions as we're going through this, feel free to post them in the chat and we can answer them for you. So why do we give you all this context? Well, to the extent you're feeling blocked by any sort of career challenge, you can just think about the framework that we taught you today and ask yourself, what do I need to let go of? And what can I embrace instead, right? Maybe I need to let go of thinking something's unfair or thinking I'm a victim. And maybe I need to embrace my passion, an opportunity, or maybe a chance to catch my breath from, years of working 80-hour weeks, and embrace the free time and the chance to spend more time with my family and friends and reconnect, even if it's over Zoom, with people whom I love, okay? So what do I need to let go of? What do I need to embrace? Another way of reframing a situation that might frankly suck. That's a technical term. You probably learned that one in, when you got your license too. So I think you're up on the next slide. Oh no, it's still me. Okay. So another way of thinking about, again, any situation that isn't what you wanted it to be, right? And don't we have that all day long, right? We get stuck in traffic on I-95, or well, COVID, right? We're forced to shelter in place and wear masks and whatever. That's out of our control. If you think about the degrees of control and influence, you can see they're represented here by concentric circles. And what's in the middle, the things for which we have control, things we're in control of, notice intentionally, it is the smallest circle. Because what's the only thing that any human being can actually control? You got it, ourselves, right? You know, and how do we control ourselves? By thinking about that triangle. What am I thinking? What am I feeling? How can I change it, right? That's the only thing that's in our control. Everything else is so out of our control. It's a wonder that we don't have more anxiety, quite frankly. Okay, so now I'm going to go to the outside circle, the circle of things that are out of our control, or things that we can't control. And wasting time wringing our hands about it and obsessing about it and bitching and moaning and complaining and blaming is really a waste of energy, right? Because we're not going to change it. The magic of this circle, or the juicy part of the circle, is the circle of influence. And I actually want to start to annotate here, right? So this is the juice, okay? And it's really hard to draw with a mouse, but you get my point, okay? So the circle of influence is where you say to yourself, okay, I can't control that I was furloughed because of COVID. What can I influence though? I can influence my mindset. I can influence how I go about looking for a new job, or how I spend my time while I'm furloughed before I go back on. I can influence the things I do to continue to build my skill set in the time off, right? These are all actions that we can do because they're within our control, that will start to at least influence the things that might seem like they're out of control. One of the questions we got pre-webinar was, what if I work in an industry that is really out of favor? You know, because obviously some industries have been really hit harder than others in this pandemic and the economic downturn, right? Cruise lines, hotels, airlines, and, you know, especially for those of you alumni who remained in South Florida, that is the lifeblood of for a lot of people. And it may not be you, but maybe it's your spouse or your kid or your friend or your neighbor, and you can give them this advice. You can't control that cruise ships are docked right now and they're not doing all these grand voyages. And so what can you do? You can influence, and you can start to get your stuff together and say, okay, my industry may not be ripe for a new job right now, but these are the like 50 transferable skills that I have that I can start to think about how I could apply them in other industries and self-author a story when I'm applying for jobs, writing cover letters, interviewing, networking, etc., so that you start to gain more control over your circumstances. And so what that could look like, I want to pick a different color, is that you, oh, I didn't do this really well. What I wanted to depict here was that you can expand your circle of influence so that it eats up some of the can't control circle. And again, I didn't do that very well, but I think you get my point, right? So it's like, do what's in your control to influence the things that you think you can't control. And that's how you make magic happen in your life. Again, whether it has to do with your career or any other obstacle that you face in life. Would you add anything to that, Tommy? I know this topic is one that you speak to your clients about all the time as well. You can see I have a lot of passion on this. I'm like, ah.
I was actually going to say this ties in really beautifully with the next I love you pom-poms. I wish I had some. They're amazing.
Well, I was a cheerleader back, you know, in the dark ages. Well, actually, they weren't the dark ages. They were the light ages because we won all of our home games when I was in college back in the day. So.
Well, I was just going to say that I think everything that you brought up really transitions nicely into the last piece that I'm going to go over before we open it up for Q&A. And I want to be brief because I know that we want to leave some time for you guys to be able to ask questions.
Let me erase. I don't know. I didn't realize that this was going to come onto other slides.
I'll let you work on that as I introduce.
There we go.
So this is split up into 2 slides, and you can leave it on this one for now, and I'll let you know when to switch to the next. But you guys should, on the link that was shared in the chat, and you received it prior to this webinar, you should have the full document in front of you that you can access. And I recommend that when you're trying to identify your top values, I'm going to share a little bit more about that, what that means, that you do it with the full sheet in front of you rather than how we have it set up here for the sake of the presentation where it's split up. If we can go to the next slide so you can see the other half. So essentially what this is, it's one of my favorite activities to do with clients, and it really speaks to what Shani was bringing up, to focus on what you can control, what you can influence, connecting to your passion, purpose, and vision. I saw that in one of your slides, and I think this really speaks to that. Identifying our core values, the things that really in our gut matter most to us, can help us to stay grounded even when we're surrounded by chaos and uncertainty, when the things outside of our control feel so overwhelming. And so a metaphor that I really like to use for values is to view them kind of as a compass. We may not have full control over our destination or an outcome, but we can exert some control over our direction. Where am I headed? Where am I investing my time, my energy, my mental space? What am I focusing on? What am I moving towards? And so identifying our top values can really help us do that. So if you look at the instructions, all of the following values are worthwhile. Review the list below and select the top 10 values that feel critical to you in order to be living a meaningful and fulfilling life. A couple of words there that I think are really important. Critical. These are things you could not live without, and that can help you narrow it down, because I know that some of these might really appeal to us and it's hard to narrow it down. I've done this myself. It's challenging. But go back to this word critical. Could you live without this? And in order to be living a meaningful and fulfilling life, live a life that actually feels like you want to wake up in the morning to be a part of, something that's driven by that sense of purpose and bigger vision. And this value sort activity comes from a type of therapy called acceptance and commitment therapy. You can narrow it down to 10. It doesn't have to be in order of importance, so you don't have to identify what's my number 1, my number 2. Just your top 10 is fine. You're welcome to combine any that you feel kind of go together, and that might help with that 10 number that I know can be challenging. So if you feel like 2 are kind of similar, feel free to clump that into 1. And you're also welcome to add any that aren't included. This isn't exhaustive. So feel free to incorporate any ones that are a good fit for you but aren't on this sheet. So I'm not going to give you guys time to do this right now for the sake of our time together, but I do encourage you to take some time tonight or later this week and do this activity for yourselves. I find that it's a really helpful anchoring kind of self-reflective tool that we can use. Next slide, please. And so once you've identified your top 10 values, a big question that I get from my clients is, okay, so now what? Where do I go from here? And so I've provided a worksheet that again is included in the link as well as was sent to you before. And this is from a type of therapy called dialectical behavior skills therapy. And it's a sheet that really helps us transition from the big picture value to set of goals to tangible action steps. And I think this is where we transition from that big picture stuff to what can I do right now? What can I do today to exert some control over my situation? And so here it gives you an example. Let's go on to the next slide. This is the example from the worksheet, by the way, so it doesn't really apply to career for that one. This is what the kind of the meat of the worksheet really looks like. If you notice, it has you pick 1 value, identify 3 goals related to that value. So you're breaking it down little by little, and then circle 1 goal to work on right now, identify some, brainstorm all the different actions you could take to move towards that particular goal. And here you want to just really give yourself freedom to come up with as many ideas as you can, and then pick one of those steps to take right now. If we could go to the next slide, I've created an example for you guys so you could see what it might look like. Let me make this a little bigger. As you can see from my glasses, I'm a little blind. There we go. So if we give the example of my value being achievement, some goals could be secure a stable job that supports my professional growth, learn new and demand skills within my field, pursue entrepreneurial ways to monetize my skills. Then I circle one, I'm gonna go with learn new and demand skills. And I encourage you, maybe start with the one that feels most attainable, the one that feels like I can actually do something about this right now, so that you start to build up that momentum and that sense of capability within yourself. Some action steps that could relate to that goal might be search for discounted virtual trainings or webinars, read a book that will expand my skills, conduct informational interviews with people in my field to ask what are the skills that are most in demand right now, enroll in an online certification program. And so for the sake of this exercise, I selected search for a discounted training or webinar, describe what happened next. Here's where you say, okay, I did that and here's the outcome. So I registered for X webinar. So if you notice, what I really like about this is that it helps us move towards slowly and tangibly towards those big picture items in our life. And again, if you remember, it's not a destination, but you're controlling your direction. You're moving towards the kind of life that you really want to be living. So I'm hopeful that the tools we've been able to provide you today can help you feel more in control of the situation that you're in, and can give you some ideas for how to navigate this internally to then influence what's happening around you as well. So we'll pause there, and I do want to just open it up for Q&A. I think Desiree will join us and use up some time to answer your great questions.
Well, I cannot thank you both enough for these fantastic tools that you've shared with us in terms of how to adjust our mindset to really bring out the best version of ourselves. So really, thank you so much for sharing that with us today. I think to get us started from a question perspective, and we do have some questions that have come in, please feel free to continue sending those. How do you recommend that folks who are using some of these tools and potentially selecting a value and putting some plans together, how should they hold themselves accountable to make sure that they're able to begin moving that needle for their lives?
I'm happy to share some ideas, and then Shani, feel free to add. This is a question that I get often from clients is, okay, this is a goal. How do I get myself to do the things that I need to do? It's really hard to get ourselves to do certain things. So some ideas that I have is start a peer support group if you can. Maybe find if there's anyone around you who's also looking for a job right now. It doesn't even have to be in the same field, but start almost like an accountability buddy. So maybe you do a 30-minute check-in with each other once a week to talk about, okay, how was this week for you? What were you able to accomplish? What was a challenge that you faced? Let's brainstorm together how to work through that. Let's check in next week. What's a goal you have for next week? What's a goal I have for next week? So really using someone else to help hold us accountable, I find go a long way. Let's see here, what other ideas do I have? Working with a therapist or a coach can be really helpful in holding yourself accountable. Having someone that you have to come to and say, I did that or I didn't. Obviously, I'm not going to shame you for what you did or did not do, but I find that even just speaking it out loud to someone else, I want to hold myself more accountable because I know that I got to go in there and say, oh, I didn't do that, and that's not going to feel good. So finding any kind of professional or peer-related space where you could work towards those goals, I would say.
Yes. And some things I would add to that are use your environment and use some of your knowledge about yourself and play some games with yourself. So for example, if you're not, going on LinkedIn every day and sending some notes or looking for some jobs, tie it to something you do like doing. So maybe you like going to yoga class or going to Topgolf or whatever. Don't allow yourself the pleasure of the yoga class or the Topgolf until you've done the thing that you found yourself resistant to doing. So there's a bit of a, Pavlovian reward thing going on in there. And then, while I generally always want to put a positive thing on things and frame things in a way that moves us towards what we want as opposed to away from what we don't want. The reality is that some people do respond better to the stick, not the carrot, if you know what I mean. And so a strategy that I've used with a few clients, and it's actually worked really well, is it's something that those of you who have kids might have used with your kids. So it's a money jar. And so let's say you use it to discourage your kids from using curse words. So every time they use a 4-letter word, they have to put a quarter in the bucket or $1 or whatever the going rate is in 2020. And you know, it's a little bit of a discourager for them, right? Well, every time you don't do what you said you were going to do, so you weren't accountable, well, you know what, your price is more than a quarter or $1. You're going to put 20 bucks or whatever in the jar, and at the end of every month, you're not just going to have a collection of money to, you know, and you're not going to give it to your favorite charity. You're going to give it to something that you absolutely don't believe in. You know, like the political candidate that you don't want elected, right? So you've really got like double duty sticks as, you know, one way to do that. And then something else you can do is just reminders in your environment. So maybe it's a favorite quote, or, you know, a ring or bracelet, or just something that reminds you to be accountable. And those things can also support us as well, in addition to having the people in our lives support us, whether it's a therapist, a coach, a spouse, a friend, etc.
Thank you so much. Lots of great ideas. Some more extreme than others. I like it, Shane.
Yes. Oh, so in my case, I would have to send the jar of money to Florida State. That's what I mean by send it to something.
Of course. I'm sorry. Give me a sec here.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm going to do what I said to do, because I am not sending a red cent to Tallahassee.
Okay. I'm following. We got some good tips here. This question came in for you guys. How can we remain positive and in control working with a negative Nancy and someone who's unhelpful as a coworker day to day, especially during these difficult times? Yeah. Any suggestions?
Yeah, on my end, I would really think about, regardless of what this person is bringing, however they may be showing up in a virtual space, in a live space, whatever you're doing, think about, how do I want to show up regardless? Who do I want to be in this space, regardless of what anyone else around me is doing? So again, it brings me back to those concentric circles that Shani was talking about. I have no control over this person's attitude, motivation, how they're treating, you know, people in our environment, but I do have control over how I respond and how I show up. So I think really being attentive and mindful to what you're putting out there and being in control of your responses, which is a lot easier said than done. Please know that I know that. But I do think that it's important to be mindful about that. Some things that I find really helpful, this might seem a little cheesy, but honestly, I see it go a long way. A lot of research has shown that doing a daily gratitude practice, so that might mean once a day you're jotting down something I was grateful for today, just to kind of shift that lens from you maybe getting sucked into this person's negativity and really trying to focus on, okay, if it's maybe at work, was there something today at work that I can be grateful for? Maybe doing some kind of gratitude meditation. There's a lot of great meditation programs out there. So I would really focus on your mindset, your behavior, your response, and really let this person's behavior be about them.
Yeah, and I'll just dovetail on that for a little bit and say, one of the mindsets you can hold is empathy, because you don't know what's driving their negativity. You don't know what else is happening in their lives. And I doubt there's anybody listening right now who hasn't either had a bad day, bad week, bad month, or just bad, you know, spurt in their lives and shown up as the negative Nancy, or, you know, whatever, not your best self. So just like, be like, you know what, just love the person regardless, you know, because you have the empathy.
Absolutely. Thank you. Okay, we are running short on time and we do have some more questions. So I want to try to get through as many of these as we can. This one goes to, again, making that decision on how you control what you can. After repeatedly trying to take control of one's life or situation and being unsuccessful, how do you decide to take a different approach and let go? And you've given some tools on how to actually do something different. But what about that decision point, that turning point to really make a difference?
I'll go ahead and talk about it. It was your topic, Tiny, but I do this with clients all the time too, the values thing. Usually if something isn't working or it's a consistent source of friction in your life, it's because it is not aligned with one of your most important values. So go back, do the values exercise again. And then honestly, like if you do that, almost always a light bulb will go off and say, well, no wonder I am going down, like I'm trying to hike a mountain when I really want to be swimming in the ocean, right? So it'll help you clarify, what you've been going after isn't right. And at some point, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And so you sort of have to pause and self-examine. And I always think values are a great first place to go, because I would say 9.5 times out of 10, you realize, sort of you've been barking up the wrong tree.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I'm sure our guests too as well. We are being asked for some recommendations for any good books that either of you would recommend to this audience.
Oh God, so many, but go ahead.
I'll mention one. For the values work is really rooted in a type of therapy called acceptance and commitment therapy. And a book that I love that focuses on that is called The Happiness Trap. And it talks a lot about how we tend to be on this quest to quote unquote be happy, but just how unrealistic that actually is. That really what's more realistic is a life full of a variety of emotions, and with maybe the goal being contentment or fulfillment, but not necessarily happiness all the time. And it talks a lot about how to tolerate distressing moments and distressing emotions. Another book that I think is excellent by Brené Brown called Daring Greatly talks a lot about having courage and taking risks and not listening to the people who are just kind of spectators, but really if you're the one that's actually taking the action, recognizing that you already have much more courage than any of their critical voices ever could.
Yeah. There's a lot of work out there on happiness, and I love the book you recommended, and there's other ones too. And it reminds me, for anyone who's watching, who watched the TV show Mad Men, one of my favorite Don Draper lines, he's in a pitch with a client and he says, "What is happiness? It's a moment in life before you need more happiness." And another book that I would recommend is called The Work by Byron Katie. And essentially the work is 4 questions. So it helps with the mindset. Is whatever you're thinking, is it 100% true? And because we're usually in a state of like we're stuck on something, we're like, yes, it's 100% true. The second question is it really 100% true? Is it like, might it only be 99% true? And then the third question is, who are you when you believe it's true? And the fourth question is, who might you be? Not saying be it, but who might you be if you let go of that belief? And then each of the rest of the chapters, after she teaches you how to use those questions, go through different circumstances in life. It could be relationships, jobs, parenting, you name it. So there's a bunch of different contexts in which to apply it. And then the other book, real quickly, the 4 agreements, 4 like of the best pieces of advice that you can use in your entire life. The 4 agreements are: be impeccable with your word, don't take things personally, don't make assumptions, and always do your best. I know we're running out of time, so I just
No, thank you. I think we got through most questions. That there might be a couple that we didn't. We'll make sure that we share them with Shani and Thymi, and if we're able to send those responses out, we'll share them with everyone participating. So I do want to give each of you a moment if you want to make any final remarks before we say goodbye to our audience.
one thing that I just want to say, for instance, with the question around, like, if I keep trying to exert control and I'm unable to, if you notice yourself in this never-ending kind of pattern of self-defeat, I'm a huge advocate for therapy. Obviously, I am a therapist. I've been to therapy myself. I think it can really do wonders for people. So if you catch yourself in that, just know that this space is available to you. And if you're going through economic difficulties, therapy might be more accessible than you think. Check your insurance provider if it covers mental health benefits. There's also this nonprofit called Open Path Collective. If you Google that, they will link you up with therapists that offer very low fees, $30 to $50 a session. I take 1 or 2 clients at that rate myself. So there are therapists who are willing to work with people for very reduced rates if you're going through a difficult financial time. So I just wanted to kind of get on my soapbox for therapy and just let you know that if you find yourself struggling with this kind of self-defeating talk and you're struggling to manage it independently, working with someone can really do wonders for that.
Amen. Like, one of the things I teach in leadership is the best leaders know when to ask for help. And that's a perfect example. That's of self-leadership. So, yeah, great point. Thank you guys for your time and attention today. I wish we could have seen you, but we're envisioning all of you in your home offices and all over the country.
Yes, again, I think this has been an incredibly productive way to Zoom, and I hope you all agree. I mean, Thymi, Shani, again, we cannot thank you enough for all of these great tips and tools, particularly very relevant for us during these times. And we really do appreciate the advice that you've given. I'm seeing lots of thank yous come into the chat, so we're feeling lots of love. We really appreciate that. I do want to take a quick moment. In addition to everything that you've learned today and all of the tools that you received, please remember that you have the Topple Career Center available to you. They have a variety of virtual and online resources as well. There's an Alumni Career Corner that has resources, blogs, featured jobs, our mentoring platform, and so much more. So please feel free to visit that. It's been put in the chat, alumnicareer.miami.edu. We also have our Cane to Cane platform that allows you to interact with other alumni. So if you're looking to be mentored or to mentor someone, you can go ahead and participate in that platform. So please, we welcome you to leverage those tools. Handshake is another wonderful resource which provides alumni opportunity to follow employers and apply for jobs. And of course, as a reminder, our final session in our Summer Skill Up Alumni Career Webinar Series will be on August 5th. So we hope you can join us then. We are going to have another fantastic conversation on lessons learned from the Great Recession. So Shani, Thymi, again, thank you for supporting your fellow Canes and helping all of us stay positive during these very, very challenging times. And I guess, you know, we have to end with one of these. So if you will join me in saying, "Go Canes, everyone." Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Have a great night.